The laughter stopped the moment General Harrison rolled up his sleeve, and what those young Marines saw changed everything they thought they knew about respect. But we'll get to that. What happened on that airfield has been shared over 2 million times, and by the end of this story you'll understand why some bonds are written in ink and blood. His name was Edward Marsh, 74 years old, and on this scorching July morning at Camp Pendleton's airfield, he was just an old man in a faded polo shirt sitting on a metal bench, waiting. The heat rose off the tarmac in waves. Edward had been there since 0600, 3 hours before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. He'd driven through the night from Phoenix, stopping only once for gas and black coffee. Sleep wasn't something that came easy anymore, hadn't for 50 years, so he figured he might as well be early. He sat with his hands folded in his lap, patient, still. The way men learn to be still when waiting has meant the difference between living and dying. The bench was positioned near the edge of the tarmac, close enough to see the C-130S lined up like sleeping giants, far enough to stay out of the way. Edward knew how to stay out of the way. He'd spent the last 5 decades doing exactly that, living quietly, working his tool and dye shop, raising a daughter who became a nurse, burying a wife who'd loved him despite the nightmares. Ordinary life. The kind of life he'd fought for other men to have. His left arm rested on the bench beside him, and that's when the Marines noticed. There were 4 of them. Young, early 20s, lance corporals, based on their ranks. They'd been assigned to help coordinate the ceremony, but the general's plane wasn't due for another 2 hours, and boredom does strange things to young men with too much energy and not enough wisdom. The one who noticed first was named Reyes. Sharp eyes, quick mouth. He nudged the Marine next to him and pointed. "Hey, check out Grandpa over there." The others looked. Edward didn't notice, or if he did, he didn't show it. He was watching a hawk circle overhead, riding the thermals the way helicopters never could. "What's that on his arm?" another one asked. His name was Peterson, bigger than Reyes, louder too. The tattoo was visible below the sleeve of Edward's polo shirt, faded to the point of near illegibility. What had once been dark black ink had mellowed to a bluish grey, the lines blurred by decades of sun and time. The design was unusual, not a traditional military tattoo, not an anchor or eagle or globe. It looked almost like a crude drawing, a circle with what might have been flames around it, or maybe rays, hard to tell anymore. Inside the circle, barely visible, were letters, or numbers, or both. "Dude, that's the worst tattoo I've ever seen," Reyes said, loud enough that the words carried across the still morning air. Peterson laughed. "Looks like a kid drew it. Probably got it drunk in Tijuana back when dinosaurs roamed." More laughter. The 3rd Marine, a quiet kid named Chen, looked uncomfortable but said nothing. The 4th, Martinez, was already pulling out his phone. "I gotta get a picture of this." "Don't be a jerk," Chen muttered. "What, it's funny. Old-timer probably doesn't even remember he has it." Edward heard them now, his jaw tightened. Just slightly. A small movement that most people would miss. But if you'd ever seen a man control his anger in a firefight, you'd recognize it. The careful stillness of someone who learned long ago that reaction is a luxury. He didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge them, just kept watching that hawk. The Marines moved closer, not threatening, just young and stupid and bored in the way that young and stupid and bored people move toward anything that might provide entertainment. "Hey, sir," Peterson called out. "What's that tattoo supposed to be?" Edward turned slowly. His eyes were pale blue, faded like his tattoo, but there was something behind them that made Peterson's smile falter. Just for a second. "Old memory," Edward said. His voice was quiet, rough at the edges like sandpaper on wood. "Yeah, but what is it? Looks like a campfire or something." "Something like that." "Where'd you get it?" Edward was quiet for a long moment. The hawk had disappeared behind a hangar. When he spoke again, his voice was even softer. "A long way from here," Reyes snorted. "Cryptic, very mysterious, Grandpa." "Show some respect," Chen said, but quietly. "For what? Guy's probably never seen anything more dangerous than a paper cut." Reyes looked at Edward's clothes. The worn shoes, the faded shirt, the lack of any visible identification. "What are you even doing here? This is a restricted area." "I have authorization." "Yeah? From who?" Edward reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Official letterhead. a signature at the bottom that Reyes didn't bother to read carefully. "Look, I don't know who wrote you a permission slip, but this is a military installation. We've got a 3-star general arriving today. You can't just sit here looking like—" Reyes gestured vaguely at all of Edward. "Like this. I'm waiting for someone." "Who?" "An old friend." Peterson laughed again. "An old friend? What? Did you serve together in the Revolutionary War?" The other Marines laughed. Even Chen cracked a small, uncomfortable smile. Edward said nothing. He folded the paper and put it back in his pocket. His hand was steady, completely steady. The kind of steady that comes from holding something much heavier than paper. "Seriously, though," Martinez said, leaning in to look at the tattoo more closely. "What is that thing? I've seen a lot of ink, but this is just weird. Like a sun? A gear? What are those letters inside?" Edward's jaw tightened again. He pulled his arm back slightly. Not fast, not scared. Just a clear signal that the conversation was over. "My business." Okay. Touchy subject. Martinez held up his hands in mock surrender. "Just asking. No need to get all emotional." "Some things aren't for explaining," Edward said. "Some things are just for remembering." "Ooh, profound." Reyes rolled his eyes. "Listen, old-timer. Why don't you go wait somewhere else? The general's going to be here soon, and we don't need civilians wandering around getting in the way. I'll stay here. I'm not asking." Edward looked at Reyes. Really looked at him. For a moment, something passed across the old man's face. Not anger. Something closer to sadness. Like he was seeing someone else entirely. Someone young and confident and completely unaware of how fragile everything really was. "You remind me of someone," Edward said quietly. "Yeah? Who?" "Myself, 50 years ago." Before Reyes could respond, the sound of rotors cut through the morning air. Distant at first, then growing louder. A helicopter was approaching from the east. "That's him," Martinez said. "General Harrison." The Marines immediately snapped to attention. Whatever game they'd been playing with the old man was forgotten. This was the real thing now. Lieutenant General James Harrison, 3 stars, legend. The man had served in more combat zones than most Marines would see in 3 careers: Desert Storm, Somalia, Iraq, Afghanistan. The list went on. He'd been shot twice, blown up once, and kept coming back. The kind of Marine that other Marines told stories about. The helicopter touched down, and the rotor wash sent dust swirling across the tarmac. Edward didn't move, didn't flinch, just sat there on his bench, watching, waiting. The door opened and General Harrison stepped out. He was 68 years old, but built like a man who hadn't gotten the memo about retirement. Dress uniform sharp enough to cut glass. Ribbons covering half his chest. Silver hair cut high and tight. He moved with the deliberate stride of someone who had commanded thousands and buried too many. A colonel stepped forward to greet him. The Marines held their salute, but General Harrison wasn't looking at them. He was looking past them, past the colonel, past the welcoming committee that had assembled to receive him. He was looking at the old man on the bench. "Edward?" The general's voice cracked, just slightly. In 40 years of service, none of the Marines present had ever heard that voice crack. Edward Marsh stood slowly. His joints protested, but he stood straight, the way he'd been taught to stand a lifetime ago. "Hello, Jimmy." General Harrison crossed the tarmac in 5 long strides. The Marines watched in stunned silence as the most decorated officer most of them would ever meet walked right past them without a glance. And then he did something none of them expected. He hugged the old man. Not a handshake, not a salute, a hug. Full embrace. The kind of hug reserved for brothers and fathers and men you thought you'd never see again. When the general pulled back, there were tears on his face. He didn't bother to hide them. "You came," Harrison said. "Wouldn't miss it. 50 years. 50 years." Reyes was the first to speak. His voice was small now, confused. "Sir, do you know this man?" General Harrison turned. His eyes had gone cold in a way that made every Marine present want to disappear. "Know him?" The general's voice was ice and iron. "Know him?" He took a step toward Reyes, then another. The young Marine had never felt so small. "Let me tell you about the man you were mocking, Lance Corporal. Let me tell you who's standing in front of you." Harrison's voice carried across the tarmac, clear and strong and cutting. "This is Edward Marsh, Sergeant First Class, United States Army Special Forces, 22 years of service, 3 tours in Vietnam, 2 Silver Stars, Bronze Star with V device, Purple Heart, twice. He paused to let that sink in. In 1970, Sergeant Marsh was part of a 12-man team that went into Laos on a mission so classified it still doesn't officially exist. They were ambushed, outnumbered, cut off from extraction. 9 men died in the first hour. The general's voice dropped lower. The remaining 3 were captured, held for 6 days in conditions I won't describe because none of you have earned the right to hear it. Sergeant Marsh was the only one who made it out. He carried Corporal James Harrison, my father, 17 miles through enemy territory with 2 broken ribs and a bullet wound in his shoulder. Silence. Absolute silence. My father died 2 days after they reached friendly lines. He lived long enough to see his son one last time, to hold my hand, to tell me about the man who'd carried him out of hell. General Harrison rolled up his sleeve. There on his left forearm was a tattoo, faded, crude, a circle with what might have been flames around it, letters inside, identical to the one on Edward's arm. This tattoo was designed by my father, given to the 3 survivors of Operation Burning Sun, the unofficial name for the mission that doesn't exist. Only 3 men ever wore this ink: my father, Sergeant Marsh, and Sergeant Williams, who passed away in 2015. He looked at Edward. "You're the last one." Edward nodded slowly. "Just me now." General Harrison turned back to the Marines. His voice had softened, but his eyes hadn't. This man should never have to explain himself. Not to you, not to anyone. While you were laughing at his tattoo, you were laughing at the symbol of a brotherhood forged in blood. A brotherhood that saved my father's life, that gave me the chance to know him, even if only for a few days. Reyes's face was ashen. "Sir, we didn't know." "That's exactly the point, Lance Corporal. You didn't know. You looked at a man and saw old clothes and faded ink and assumed you knew his story. You assumed you had the right to mock what you didn't understand." The general stepped closer. "Every scar tells a story. Every tattoo carries a weight. Every old man sitting on a bench might be a hero who's chosen to live quietly rather than wear his medals on his sleeve." He gestured toward Edward. "This man could have demanded respect, could have shown you the documentation that proves what he did. Instead, he sat there and took your mockery with more grace than you deserve. Because that's who he is. That's who the best of them always are. They don't need to prove anything. They've already proven everything that matters." Peterson looked like he might be sick. Martinez couldn't make eye contact with anyone. Chen, who had tried to stop them, still looked ashamed for not trying harder. Reyes stepped forward. His voice was barely a whisper. "Sergeant Marsh. Sir, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Edward looked at him for a long moment, that same sad recognition in his eyes. "You know why I said you reminded me of myself?" Reyes shook his head. "Because I was young and stupid once too. We all were. The difference between a fool and a wise man isn't that one never makes mistakes. It's that one learns from them." He reached out and put a hand on Reyes's shoulder. "Learn from this. Every person you meet is carrying something you can't see, pain you can't imagine, stories you don't know. The moment you think you can judge someone by how they look, you've already failed them and yourself." Reyes nodded. His eyes were wet. "I will, sir. I promise." Edward patted his shoulder once, then let his hand drop. "Good. Then this was worth it." General Harrison stepped forward. "Sergeant Marsh didn't come here for an apology. He came because today is the 50th anniversary of Operation Burning Sun. 50 years since my father and his brothers walked into that jungle. We're dedicating a private memorial. Just the survivors and their families, what few of us are left." He looked at Edward. "I've been waiting 30 years to thank this man properly. To tell him that everything I am, everything I've achieved exists because of what he did in those 17 miles. My career, my family, my children, my grandchildren. All of it exists because Edward Marsh refused to leave anyone behind." The general stood at attention, crisp, perfect, every bit the 3-star legend. And then he saluted the old man in the faded polo shirt. "On behalf of the Harrison family, on behalf of everyone who's ever worn this uniform, thank you, Sergeant Marsh, for everything." Edward returned the salute, slower, his arm shaking slightly now, but he held it until the general dropped his. "Your father was a good man, Jimmy. Best friend I ever had. I know, he told me, every day until the end." The memorial ceremony that followed was private, as Harrison had promised, but the 4 young Marines who had witnessed that moment on the tarmac were different men by the time they walked away. Reyes went on to become a gunnery sergeant known for being the first to welcome new arrivals, regardless of how they looked. He kept a small card in his wallet with a single sentence: "Every person you meet is carrying something you can't see." Edward Marsh passed away 3 years later peacefully in his sleep. General Harrison gave the eulogy. He spoke for 45 minutes about a 17-mile walk through hell, about brotherhood, about the kind of courage that doesn't need medals or recognition or even words. The last thing Harrison said, standing over the flag-draped coffin, was this: he never asked for thanks. He never asked for anything. He just wanted the men he served with to be remembered. Well, Edward, I promise you this: we will remember, all of us, for as long as any of us draw breath. Some bonds aren't written in paperwork or rank or ceremony. Some bonds are written in ink and blood and miles of jungle floor, and some lessons don't come from books or training or classrooms. They come from an old man on a bench who had every right to demand respect but chose instead to offer grace. Remember that the next time you think you know someone's story just by looking at them, you don't. None of us do. If this story moved you, wait until you hear what happened when a homeless veteran tried to enter his own son's wedding. The bride's father tried to have him removed. What the groom did next brought the entire church to tears. Subscribe to this channel for more stories of hidden heroes who deserve recognition. Comment brotherhood. If you believe service creates family that lasts a lifetime, and hit that like button if you think every veteran story deserves to be heard.